broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Under the Hood with Claris Engineers, which will be a close look at Claris FileMaker Server 19.1.2, our latest release. It's my pleasure to welcome you. I'm Rosemary Teege, Head of Community at Claris. Before I hand it off to our featured presenters, I'd like to remind you that we will have plenty of time for questions at the end of today's presentation. The instructions are on the screen, but just a reminder, you can type in questions at any time during the presentation today in the control panel. So please type your questions in as soon as they come to you, and we will ask them at the end of the session. And we'll have, as I said before, plenty of time, and we will address as many questions as we can. So now let's get started. And to kick things off, I'd like to introduce Rick Coleman, Director of Product Management for Claris FileMaker.
Thank you, Rosemary. As Rosemary says, I'm Rick Kelman. I am the Director of Claris FileMaker platform. And before we turn it over to the engineering team, I'd like to briefly talk about the FileMaker platform release cadence. Now that we've moved beyond annual releases to a more regular Agile release cadence. So we'll see releases of the FileMaker platform, which includes FileMaker Pro, FileMaker Go, FileMaker Server, which of course includes FileMaker WebDirect, on at least a quarterly or even sometimes a monthly cadence. Now, we've already started this more frequent Agile cadence with the release of both FileMaker Pro and FileMaker Server 19.1.2 just recently. Now, along with our more frequent release cadence, you are likely to be aware at this point that we've also released a Linux version of FileMaker Server. Now, this has been a long-standing and popular request from the FileMaker developer community as well as our customers. And we expect this also to help with reduce some of the friction that you may receive when trying to convince IT, for example, to host a FileMaker server, whether that's an on-premise deployment or if you're deploying your own server in the cloud. So next, let's take a look at FileMaker Linux Server as it compares to our Mac OS and Windows servers. So on this slide, you see a graph which represents a performance comparison of our Mac OS, Windows, and now Linux servers. Orange represents our Windows server, blue is our Mac server, and green is FileMaker Server on Linux. And a shorter bar means that it's faster. Now, our data indicates that our Linux server is faster in most categories, with the exception of scan forward and scan reverse, and sort forward and sort reverse, which are a bit slower, but we're already working to address this because of our quarterly release cadence. You're going to see more improvements all along the way. So next, I'd like to introduce Lucy Chen, who's our Vice President of the FileMaker platform. Again, that includes FileMaker Pro, Go, Server, Cloud, and WebDirect. And Lucy has been with Claris since 1995 and has been at the backbone of all FileMaker product releases since that time. Since May of this year, Lucy has taken on responsibility of the FileMaker platform Agile transformation and our faster release cadence. Also, we have with us today Clay Makel, our Chief Architect for the FileMaker platform, Wade Ju, our FileMaker Server Architect, Dave McKee, Marcel Alto, Li Cheng, and Connor Brock, who are representing FileMaker Engineering for FileMaker Pro, Server, and Quality Assurance. So now I'll turn it over to Lucy.
Thank you, and thank you to our loyal community. I lived in Seattle before Claris. And one summer, I took ferry boat to work from Bainbridge Island to downtown Seattle. In the morning, it was always chilly, misty, and cloudy. But sometimes it is crystal clear. The view of the city on the ferry was Stunning. Pacific Ocean and Northwest Forest dancing together. It smelled fresh. The air was sweet, crisp, rich in oxygen. Today, Claris community, we want to show you a transparent view. In May 2020 this year, I was empowered to do 3 things. Engage with our customers to optimize and deliver FileMaker product all the way up to the customer's real environment, not just the engineering desktops. Apply Agile at scale, Agile transformation. And you have to get used to this real release cadence. Things are no longer just happening in May. Let's look at our ring deployment. We had 2 circles of customers, ETS and public release. ETS is great to us. We love it. We thank you all for your great feedback. In our Agile transformation, we added Ring 0 customers. Huge thanks to our handful of Ring 0 customers. They all have over hundreds of FileMaker servers and thousands of FileMaker clients. You are the North Star that led us to 19.1.2, a better release. It is paramount to start with customer-centric goal in Agile transformation. Get quick feedback to our customers are extremely valuable. Every developer wants to do a great job. We assume so until it's otherwise. If feedback comes in a few hours from developer commit, well, they're still thinking about working on the same part of the code. We can accurately identify the problem. This type of feedback can help developers to become better coders. We can show you our work before it's fully baked and pivot to what you want. We get the result that matters the most to you. Let's see it. I want to mention that we've made significant updates across the platform with Pro and Cloud, but today we're showcasing improvements in FileMaker Server. We have improved stability and reliability and performance improvement. We've added DBA functionalities. We have an installer to assist you to upgrade from 18.19 directly. All configuration and schedules saved and carried forward. You can save a ton of time upgrading to the latest and greatest server. We went through a lot of bugs to get here. Here's an example of PLL and server. We had a lot of these. I'm going to ask directly to server architect. Wade, what did we do?
We did a lot. We disabled page table lock in PLL in today's release to improve stability. By implementing sharing lock in low-level HBand layer, it effectively allows concurrent readers to access databases simultaneously. From internal and external testing, sharing lock shows similar level of performance as PLL. To further improve stability and reliability, we have a stress tests and longevity testings with a multi-dimension approach, like increase number of concurrent users, make testing time longer, add more databases with larger and bigger size databases like 50 gigabyte, 100 gigabyte, more testing tools and more testing cases. Lots of external and internal tools are used: dynamic analyzer, static analyzer, TSEN, ASEN. Here is just a quick list. And this slide shows testing results from our QA 100 user JMeter response time testing on Windows Server 2016. The results are, we are 98% faster on average response time compared to release 19 without PLL. A quantum leap since May. A database server needs regular maintenance to keep it in a good shape with performance. We have a built-in validation schedule for admin to use to verify all databases, with additional admin API for fine granularity control. For clouds or system not able to close database, purge TempDB schedule can be run without closing database to shrink TempDB files and release critical HBase cache in memory. We also support elliptic curve SSL certificate, the so-called ECC certificate, besides legacy RSA certificate. The ECC certificate with 256 bits key length can be as strong as RSA certificate with a 3K bit length. It has a stronger security and fast performance. So we recommend you to try our new server.
Thank you, Wade. That was a lot of effort. Please check out the engineering blog that related to these information, and we have 10 published since July. We injected real oxygen to this server release. I have a question to our chief architect, Clay. Clay, do you have any under the hood information for find and sort?
Thanks, Lucy. With the introduction of PLL and shared locking into the HBAM layer of the Draco engine, we have been relooking at the implementation of many of the internal operations of Draco to help improve performance. Previously, access to a particular index during a find or query operation was serialized due to the original course level HBAM locking mechanisms. But now with shared locking, we can do more of those query operations in parallel. On Windows, we still limit the number of parallel index queries to be in proportion to the number of CPU cores, but the Mac and Linux operating systems thread management does a good job of handling the larger number of threads at the same time. Remember, Draco was originally designed to run well in a machine with 16 megabytes of RAM, not gigs, megabytes. So there are operations that use temporary disk-back data structures to process data that could have been considered large back then. One place where we have replaced that structure with a pure memory-based design is during the indexing of multi-word or multi-key text field contents. This helps speed up the initial entry, updating, and deletion of non-trivial fields during the commit operations of records. Also added is the ability of the clients to request the server to do a sort of set of records instead of downloading all the records to the client and doing the sort locally. When the clients request a sort, it sends a list of record IDs, which you can see in the calculator when you ask for the record ID, and the sort criteria for a particular table to the server. The server sorts the records and then returns a sorted list of the record IDs back to the client. There are a lot of conditions that have to be taken into consideration to do the sort on the server, which includes the type of fields being sorted, how many of the data rows have already been downloaded to the client, and the recent CPU usage of the server. Early testing of this feature showed that having a bunch of clients ask the server to do sorts all at the same time could drive the response time of the server to unacceptable levels. So this is one of the reasons why there isn't a clear indication necessarily of whether the sort operation is going to be done on the client or the server, because it's very dynamic based on what's currently happening in all the different Draco engines. So now let's go look at another chart. PLL was our first take at improving the performance of the low-level data store mechanism of Draco, which is internally called HBAM, the hierarchical B-tree access method. Previous under-the-hood presentations go into more detail of what that manager does. One reminder, though, is that there are two different layers of locking in the Draco engine. There's the high-level record locking that the user can see that prevents two users from editing the same records at the same time. And then there's the low-level locking that is done to prevent multiple threads from accessing the same portions of the FileMaker file at the same time. When we're talking about PLL and shared locking, It's this low-level locking that we have changed. We have not changed the record-level locking schemes. PLL, or page-level locking, was a complex design to maximize the number of threads reading and writing to an individual file at the same time. Complexity is hard to debug and to catch all the edge conditions. So we started work on a new design, a much simpler design called shared locking, which allows multiple threads to do reading allows multiple threads all to do reading operations at the same time, but they will be stopped when a write operation is requested, and only one write operation is allowed to be performed at the same time. Note that these operations are at a much lower level than record or even field reading and writing. Fields can span multiple blocks of a file, and the interleaving of operations can still occur while two update operations are occurring at the same time, because the low-level storage mechanisms work on much smaller chunks, about at the most 1K of data at a time. Even though the shared locking is simpler than PLL, this chart shows a case where it actually outperforms PLL. The blue bars are version 19 with PLL enabled, and the green bars are 19.1.2. A smaller response time is better, and the green bars are shorter in general in this case. So now let's go back to Lucy.
Thank you, Clay. We invite you to see, hear, and feel that FileMaker engineering teams are engaging with you, our customers, our community, and pivot to agile transformation and delivering a new release cadence so you can create wonders with FileMaker. And thank you all.
Thank you, Lucy. And also thank you, Clay and Wade and Rick, for that great information about what's new and improved in FileMaker Server. And with that, I just wanted to share a few key resources that were mentioned during this session. First link is the engineering blog, which is in our knowledge base. And if you go to the engineering blog link or search the knowledge base for engineering blog, you'll get a parent article that then has links to all the specific articles. Second, you can find the release notes for FileMaker Server 19.1.2 in the knowledge base. And I want to commend the entire FileMaker team on the deeper and richer release notes they've published recently. And finally, if you have feedback or ideas for further things we can do to improve Claris FileMaker, you can use the ideas area in the Claris community. So with that, we've had a bunch of questions come in. So let's get started with questions and answers.
Thank you, Rosemary. You know, we have questions coming in. We do have a luxury of as much as 40 minutes of being able to ask your under the hood questions to our chief architects and engineers on the platform. So I'll try to keep up as best as possible as these come in. So the first question I have here, it says the release of FileMaker Server 19.1.2 mentioned industry standard testing was done associated with shared lock improvements. Can you explain a little more of what sort of testing you're doing or did? And I'm not sure, Clay, if this is related to the ASAN and TSAN mentioned, but there's the question.
Yeah, that's related to ASAN and TSAN, which is the ASAN is address sanitizer and TSAN is the thread sanitizer. These are different, I guess they're open source projects that come with the different compilers, which we run the application underneath. And it really slows down the app or the server when you're running it, but it checks every memory access to make sure you're not accessing memory in a freed block, that you're not releasing memory twice, that you're actually releasing memory when you should be releasing memory, that threads aren't stepping over each other. So the QA team's been spending a lot more time, and the engineers too, putting in the hooks for all these tools to run the apps under these situations and fix any of the things that reports. So those are more like dynamic tools that you run while the app is running. But what else is we've been using is these static tools that come with Microsoft Visual Studio, with Xcode, and some other third-party tools that we've purchased to just analyze the source code, to take a look at the source code, and while it's not running, just look at it and make sure that we're not using variables, overriding variables, making sure that we initialize variables before we use them, and much more stuff. We've also, in the compilers, we now have a new policy of removing all warnings that the compiler may spit out. And, some warnings you can ignore, but we've changed the policy now that we want to be able to turn on the flags when we compile all our code, that if there's any warning, to treat all warnings as errors. So we're going through it, and every so often, these warnings do show a potential problem that can occur. So we're using as many tools as we can get from other vendors or that come with the compilers, and looking at other things to run this stuff to find any potential problems.
Thanks, Clay. Here's a question that I'll answer, and it says, do you foresee that PHP and JDBC connectors will be continued into the future? And then they make a statement that we use those a lot for integrating FileMaker into our existing systems. So we will be deprecating PHP. However, there should be PHP that would still be available to run as you've been doing for a while. You can actually use other PHP sources. We expect that to continue, but on our side, we'll no longer go down that path. We're moving down the RESTful API, or the data API direction. We will continue with JDBC, but we're also introducing capabilities such as OData and that sort of thing. So next question here is, and this may be related in context to the content when you were talking, Wade. It says, how long does it take to process the server maintenance tasks on server?
Yeah. So this one, it totally depends. So the thing is, the purge temp DB will clean up those process transaction already saved to delete. So it will totally depends on, say, how much accumulated over there. So if say the system has processed it frequently, normally it probably should be short. However, if say that's haven't done for a long time, it could be take a little bit longer time, and try to grab all the log and try to delete those things safe to be deleted. And also, you will depends on the hardware speed. Like you say, if you are fast SSD, that will faster, and if you are slower machine, might be take a little bit long time. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Wade. A follow-up question to the PHP from James and others. Yes, James, the XML publishing will remain as well. Next question here is the .fmpeg12 file format, does it still work on FileMaker Server 19? The answer there is yes. Next is a question, is FileMaker Server 19.1.2 optimized for the new M1 chip from Apple?
Well, I guess I'll take, yeah, no, 19.1.2 does not have the ARM code inside the bundle, but we are working on it. We are looking at it. The current stuff that's come out of Apple is really the low end M1 ARM chips and stuff like that. We're kind of waiting to see what the high end stuff is going to look like for running the server product on. But we are working on it, and we are watching what Apple's doing, and we have been playing around and testing it, but we're still waiting to see a little bit more on Apple's more direction that they're going, and any other things that we need to do, but we are working on it.
Okay, thanks, Clay. Here's a question. Is the memory footprint of the FileMaker server D, essentially FM server D on Mac OS, a good gauge of how much memory we'll need on Linux for FileMaker server?
Well, my experience on looking at these memory footprints and thread usage using the different tools that come with the Mac OS kind of lies quite a bit of how much memory is actually being used. The Mac OS tries to cache a lot of stuff and will hang on to stuff. Even though we release it, they may hang on to it in case that we want to allocate it again. So it's actually getting harder when you're looking at these different tools of how much memory is actually being used. You can even see that on your hard drives with the Mac OS when it says, oh, you only have, you know, 14 gigabytes left. Oh, but 600 gigabytes are purgeable. So you really have to look at these numbers a little bit closer. But in general, the memory footprint, I think should, well, if you get if you look at the right numbers on the Mac OS, it should match up pretty closely on the Linux side. And even Linux may be a little bit smaller because it's a skinnier operating system. It doesn't have as many features that the Mac OS does, so it doesn't have to carry around a lot more stuff with it.
Thanks, Clay. Here's a question that says, why is threaded sorting not enabled by default on server?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, this is going into our release cycles now. We're doing releases a lot quicker. We're putting in feature flags that only really ETS people should be playing around with turning on and off and stuff like that. Those aren't really designed for production usage. This is for testing, and we just haven't felt happy with how it's working right now. It's not that it necessarily has problems, but we're seeing some degradations if you turn it on and you do a lot of sorts or other operations and stuff like that. But we are working on it, and we do imagine in the future someday it'll be on by default. But at this point, it's still you're seeing some of the stuff we're working on as we're working on it, and we don't tend to turn things on until we're sure that we do want it on.
Great, thanks, Clay. Here's a question I'll answer. It asks if FileMaker Server 19.1.2 is production ready on Linux servers, and the answer is yes. Through the summer, since we released FileMaker 19 in May, we had a developer preview available for anyone who had a server license, but as of 19.1.2, we have officially certified our Linux server as production ready. So the answer there is yes. Next question is, any plan to reduce FileMaker network chattiness so WAN performance gets better?
Well, we are always looking at performance. I mean, it's on the list of things in our backlog to look at and work on. It's just that there's different priorities of what things we want to do first before other things, but it is on the list.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Clay. Okay, here's a question. Looks like web publishing engine is not supported on FileMaker Linux server. Does that mean any existing standard PHP server running on API no longer work with FileMaker Linux server 19? Who wants to take that? We don't support PHP, but I believe we're still using the web publishing engine for WebDirect. I could be wrong.
Web publishing engine is supported in Linux. Yeah.
It is also possible to integrate with FileMaker through the data API and make those calls through PHP. And I kind of think that's the direction we want to encourage.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing about the XML APIs is that we are planning to continue supporting them how they're working now, but it's really just kind of locked down and stuck in maintenance mode, the XML APIs. All future work, all future additions, doing maybe notifications, so you can do better webhooks and all that stuff. All that's only going to be done on the FileMaker data API. So all future work, all future optimizations, performance improvements and stuff like that are going to be coming on that side. XML is, you can continue using it if you need to and stuff like that, but I would really ask people to start moving over to the new API.
Thanks, guys. Next question. We use Apple products and currently use FileMaker 15. Would there be any issue with migrating over to FileMaker 19?
Currently, that we don't have a upgrade installer for 15, but you can do like previous major release. You need to preserve your configuration and do a fresh new install for 19.
Yeah, and it's the same file format, so you should be able to bring that forward. You do obviously want to test before you deploy, but you should be able to go there. Next question. Oh, go ahead.
Well, one last thing about the last one is you also may have to upgrade the operating system too. If you're probably running on 15 on a much older operating system, and 19 will require a more recent operating system, so it won't just be updating FileMaker. You'll probably have to update the OS also.
Yeah, good point.
Point.
Next question, will the changes in 19.1.2 also improve the ESS or external SQL source performance?
I believe we made an improvement to MySQL specifically, but not necessarily the others. But that's certainly a direction that we've gotten a lot of interest in.
Thanks, Connor. Here's a question. It says, isn't the HTML DDR deprecated? First, I've seen mention of the XML DDR. I don't know if that's you, Dave.
Yeah, I can take that question. So you might have noticed a new command called save a copy as XML, and you may have noticed that that XML that's generated is different than the XML generated by the DDR. So we call that new XML grammar XML 2.0, and that's going to be the foundation for all of our pro-related XML features, including add-ons and such. So the older grammar is going to be deprecated and removed eventually in preference for XML 2.0. The original DDR XML was an ad hoc grammar just designed to generate a DDR to display specific choice pieces of information. XML 2.0 is designed to be round trippable, which means you can save XML from your database and then take that XML and recreate your database. That's the goal. So it's much more accurate and descriptive of your database. So we want to work with that from now on. So we're working on having that grammar become the next DDR 2.0. So yeah, right now DDR will still work. There's no specific plans to remove it immediately. But eventually, when XML 2.0 is ready, you'll see a new DDR and the old one will be gone.
Thanks, Dave, for that elaboration. Simple question here, will Cloud Server be at parity with 19.1.2? FileMaker Cloud, I assume we're talking about.
It is. You already update the 19.1.2.
Yeah, Yi, thanks. Yeah, we have already pushed out an update to FileMaker Cloud, and it does have parity with the 19.1.2 features. Here's a question, more of a feature request, but I'll put the bug in the ears of the people that do all these things. Could we get FileMaker Server admin tool instead of the text setting files we have to put in FileMaker Server and or the client? I'm talking about some of the new configuration files that people can now work with. So that's more of a feature request. Yeah, definitely we're looking at those things. I think this is another one. Could we get server schedule to generate the DDR XML export automatically? And then they have the same question for XML. I don't know if that's anything that Clay or Dave needs an additional comment on. It's essentially a feature request. But is there any reason we couldn't do that? To have the server.
That's one of those things that's always at the it seems to be always at the top of the list of the next thing to do, but then something else pops right above it. So it'll probably be coming sooner than later. So.
Okay, thanks. Next question: will plugins work with the Linux server?
Current,
Yes.
yeah, but you have to talk to your vendor to get a Linux version of the plugin. So there's now, when the vendors come out with the plugins, they need to have, well, potentially 4 types of plugins. A plugin built for Windows, a plugin built for the Mac OS, a plugin built for the Linux version, and then potentially if you're using the iOS SDK, they may have a iOS specific or for Go plugin for that too. So the Linux server can run plugins. You'll have to get a new one from your vendor.
Thanks, Clay. This one's probably for you, Yi. It says, is FileMaker Server 19.1.2 ready for Big Sur?
I did some testing on that with my team, and we did not find any known issues. So yes.
Clay, there's a question that just came in for you. You can probably read it directly, but it says, could you make FMX _ set the current envi or env run on server so some third-party plugin functions could be thread safe?
It's really not so much as thread safe, but what session it wants to talk to. The API really doesn't have any target. Really what they want to do is probably fire up their own session. It's really complex. We've put in some work to maybe look at how to do this, but it's really a complex problem. So I wouldn't see that happening soon, but we are thinking about it.
Okay, thanks. So here's a question. One of the slowest operations we see over a WAN are the summarizations of fields. Is this something that might move to the server?
Potentially. Though now, some people, well, whenever we move things around, from the client to the server, trying to guess whether it's going to be necessarily faster on the server than the client can sometimes be hard based on, if it's a one-shot operation that you can only do the summary once, then sometimes it's better to do on the server. But and it's the same with the sort operations. You see the server sorting on server. But if you're going to be doing that same operation over and over again, it's usually then better to do it on the client than instead of the server. And being able to go through and analyze your solution and figure out, well, was this a one-shot operation, or should we have brought everything down on the client because you're going to be doing it over and over again? It's one of those tough problems, since we don't know how the solution is going, or what the solution is going to be doing in the future. But some of the framework is down there to be able to do the summaries on the server side, but that's one of the list of possible optimizations. But I think we'll be working on other things first before we get to that.
Okay, thanks, Clay. There's a question regarding progressive backups. If you set to a separate physical drive, if both drives aren't the same, is FileMaker server performance reduced to the speed of the slower drive?
I think it really depends on how your drives are connected. I mean, this is more of a hardware issue. If you have a long chain of USB drives or FireWire drives all connected on the same bus, the operating system may be slowing the fastest drive down to the slowest one. From our point of view, from the FileMaker side, this is more an operating systems issue, not something that we can actually control. We'll talk to every drive as fast as the operating system will give it to us, give the data to us. So we don't have any limits based on whatever the speed of any particular drive. This is more of operating system and hardware tuning issue.
Thanks. Here's a question regarding the FileMaker data migration tool, asking, is it available for Linux server? And if it is it, do you use it via the CLI or via the admin API?
Yeah, go ahead, Yi.
Yeah. I think we're looking. I think we should have the admin API. I need to go back to check if that's already available.
Yeah, I don't think we've posted it for people, the Linux version to download yet. For Linux for server, it'll be the same as the other server products. It's just a standalone command line tool that you can run. I don't think there's plans currently to bring down the new APIs from the cloud to bring that to on-premise. Though that could always be a future feature. But right now, I think what you were kind of mentioning, you were talking about the API, and that's a cloud-only feature right now at this point. But the command line tool that you can get for Mac and for Windows, we'll probably eventually put up the a Linux one too, so there'll be all three forms on the if you're a FBS member.
Thanks, Clay. This is a question I believe I'll answer, but would certainly like Yi or Lucy to tell me if I'm correct. But it asks if fines are now cancelable. We're not there yet, but we're currently working on it. Am I correct, Yi?
That's correct. Yep.
Thanks. Here's a question. How does the keep records sorted option play with the sorting on the host?
No, that's they're independent. They're not directly related. Other than actually, when a new record comes in on the client side, when it notices there's a change or a new record is created, it actually doesn't do a full sort. It'll just inject the new record into the current sort order. So it's not really doing what we're considering the sort operation. It's just amending the current sort that's locally. So keep records sorted will tend not to do a full sort, so it won't be going back up to the host. Though there are some operations when it says keep records sorted, I think there's points when there's enough records have changed at one time, it will then do a full sort. And then at that point, it'll potentially sort on the host.
Thanks, Clay. Here's a question. With features like sort on server now in the product, does that change the recommended 50% RAM setting for FileMaker server using the FS admin set server config catch size CLI operation?
I don't think it necessarily changes it that much. I mean, when you're sorting locally, you had to download all the records and pull them off the disk through the cache and send them down to the client. When you're doing the sort on server, you still have to pull in all the data to read it to do the sort operation. It's just that then you don't transmit all the data over the wire back to the client. So the cache requirements really don't change at all.
Okay, here's a question from Vincent. Now that we essentially removed the PLL or page level locking and replaced it with shared locking so that read operations get multi-threaded, but write operations are still single-threaded. And then it's just a statement that we hope we'll also see multi-threaded write operations back in the future. So it's more a statement, but any comment on that from the team?
Yeah, well, PLL had the potential of doing multi-threaded writes operations, but as we watched it in typical operations, it actually rarely occurred because of other things causing it, and how PLL was designed, and how it had to lock multiple blocks. I mean, it was really pretty complex system, but I mean, when we looked at the design and said, oh, wow, this should help quite a bit with writes, but in practice, it never really worked because of the requirements in it. So really going from PLL to shared locking doesn't really improve the number of writes that you can do at the same time. And now realize this locking that we've been talking about is we're just talking about a single file. FileMaker for the longest time can do writes at the same time to multiple files. So you can have two write operations going on exactly at the same time to two different files. Limited to, well, you can't really do them at the same time if they're on the same bus on your hardware in the back end. But the PLL to share locking changes, we're just talking about an individual file. And usually when you're doing writes, whether two people are talking to two parts of the file at the same time, it may be handy to do multiple writes at the same time, but even though PLL was designed to do that, we noticed that it didn't really happen. It never really allowed it that often. And I'm not sure if we're going to spend that much effort into trying to optimize the multiple writes into one particular file at the same time. There's a lot more optimizations that'll get us a bigger bang for the buck than working on that.
Thanks, Clay. Got another question here from Vincent that is sort of near and dear to my heart. And the reason is especially for anyone who creates third-party products or is an SBA product provider or is supporting customers as a developer with their deployed solution. And this is probably going to be aimed towards you, Dave, but Vince asks, when will, and I don't expect you to ask when, but it's more philosophical, when will we get full FileMaker file creation from pure XML files?
So it's an interesting question because that's actually the reason why we created XML 2.0. Originally, if you remember way back when, we used to have templates that we had to localize. And so when you create a file from a template, what we used to do was copy that file and rename it the copy. So basically we had to have, for example, if you had like an asset management template, we had to have an English FileMaker file with that. And then LET had to go into FileMaker, make copies for French, Italian, etc. And it was really a laborious and error-prone process. So what we wanted to do is provide LET with just a text file with a string mapping. The problem is that FileMaker doesn't work that way. So we had to figure out, okay, well, what we can do is this string file could be integrated with XML, and we could actually create the French version of your asset management template on the fly. And so that's how XML 2.0 started. So we've always wanted to do full FileMaker file creation. The problem is that first of all, FileMaker is an extremely complex format with decades of features matured and baked into it. So all of the XML code that serializes and deserializes these features, it has to be written. It's all new code. So we're working on it. It's going to take a long time. And then also, there's things in the FileMaker format that's invisible to the user, and those aren't implemented yet either. So we can't promise full fidelity right now. I think we're about like 60 to 80% there. But we're working on it. We really want to do it. This will also allow you to modify your existing files on the fly, so to speak, with like script steps. You can add and delete file fields while you're using the solution, really cool things like that. So we're really excited about it. But to give a roadmap of like, oh, when is it going to be 100% done? That's extremely difficult. I don't think we're going to be able to. But with this new Agile process and our new philosophy of like giving you guys new improvements sooner, even though they might not be fully, polished, so that we can get feedback from you. I think that's going to help give you these features that utilize XML 2.0. You're going to be able to use them much sooner. I mean, if we were doing this the old way, you would have never even seen XML 2.0, and it would be like 5 years out before we even give you any of these features that we have already. Yeah, no timeline specifically. We're just going to try to prioritize and implement these features based on XML 2.0 and deliver them to you as we get them done and eventually we'll get there.
Thanks, Dave.
To-
And I'll add to that, and I think someone else wanted to chime in as well, but I'll add to that as the Director of Product Management. One, we get this, we want this, we know why you want it. If you are familiar with our new drag and drop JavaScript add-on components and think about what those do, not only is it JavaScript, but you can essentially, it can create the tables, the scripts, and the relationships, and that's all using this XML 2.0 that Dave is talking about. So obviously, if you're trying to update solutions that are already deployed or infuse new schema, we get it. Was it Lucy? Was that you that wanted to, or someone else? Yeah.
Yeah, just to re-emphasize that this is really gold for us. I see all the questions flashing in. Thank you so much. Really good. I want to give you a sense of how things flow internally. We spend a lot of time talking to customers and read every single post in the community. And that become a huge, very important source of our backlog items. And we prioritize them. Folks, Rick's department, we get all those backlog items and prioritize them. And we pick those to do our sprint tasks and knock them down one by one. And we have 2-week sprints right now, and we do journey level demos to customers and internal folks, and before it's fully completed, then we release it monthly and quarterly instead of the 12 or 18 months. So this customer-centric Agile framework is really leading us to the right direction. So that's why you see Linux server, you see the performance improvement, absolutely important for us. And yesterday we released the 19.2 ETS, so go try that out. And it's in good shape and will be coming very soon. Of course, all the future stuff that we will be continue to push out as things are ready. So Rick, back to you.
Thank you, Lucy, for that. Another question here from Philip. With the addition of sorting on the server, will there be a mechanism exposed to report on server capacity so that solutions can consider whether to run a script as perform script on server or locally?
I guess I've never heard this request before. That sounds very interesting. I'm not quite sure how terribly useful the number is that comes back for you guys, but we could add a get function that returns it. I could probably do it before the podcast is over. But yeah, maybe we'll consider that.
Thanks, Clay. I love it. I don't know how many features Clay has actually cranked out in his room during a DevCon, but now with our new Agile and more frequent releases, we can actually get those in releases. Sometimes some of our architects will create something and it could take a couple of years to get it in. That's why from the product management and engineering side, we're thrilled to be moving to something much more closer to relevancy.
Oh yeah, well, it'll probably take longer for me to write up the Jira task and put it into the process and get it approved, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a paper trail. Dave, just a kudos from Vincent. He said XML generation is awesome, especially on the fly. Thanks a lot, congratulations, and thanks for explaining this, going into the level of detail. Another question, Clay, and this is, probably don't go too deep, but give a little bit more elaboration. If you ever go to an under the hood session, especially when you're talking to our architects, you often hear about this mysterious HBAM. And so what is that in FileMaker, and why is it important? What does it do?
Yeah, the Draco engine has multiple layers of how it operates. There's the higher level stuff does record locking, queries, sorting, calculations and stuff like that. But at the bottom layer, the lowest most layer has this operating system agnostic API for doing reads and writes to the file. Right on top of that is our mechanism of how we store the files. We use this big B tree. It's like you can think of it as a tree with leaves, and every chunk of data is stored at a leaf. Like the contents of a field could be stored at one leaf, and the branches is the address of how to get to that leaf to get the contents of a specific field. HBAM, which is the hierarchical B-tree access method, is just the name that we've given the code that does this stuff. That given the address of a leaf and a node, how to read it and write it to the file format. And this is where a lot of the PLL and shared locking work has been done, is at this layer, because everything goes through this layer when it goes to the disk and comes from the disk. And that's why we've been working on different techniques to work on making it quicker and stuff like that. What's kind of interesting about the HBAM stuff is it's almost like a precursor to what Google and everyone else is using for big data, where they basically just have key data stores and they have these large keys. Ours is a little bit more complex in that it's hierarchical. You can represent keys in a hierarchy and represent a whole series of leaves with just using a higher level branch instead of a specific one. Most big data has only one key for one piece of data, but it's just the mechanism we use for how we store stuff on disk and how we reference it, because the HBAM layer doesn't know whether it's a record or layout or an image or what it's storing. It just knows about these hierarchical list of keys and how it's stored.
Great, thanks, Clay. Here is something from Heidi, and she writes, in regard to the uncertainty about whether summaries and sorts would be most optimally performed on the server or the client, have you considered making that an option the developer could specify? That way the developer could evaluate which would work best in their solution and then set it to run in the best performing context.
Yeah, I mean, we've been tweaking the algorithm for deciding when to do it on the client versus the server. Well, one thing is that there's really no way to force it to run on the server all the time. There's certain requirements where you can't do the sort on the server. Like the tables, you may have one table on one server and another table on the other server that are related, and there's no way you can do a sort on one server because you don't know which server you would do it on. So that work has to be done on the client. Same as if you have some tables in a local file versus that are related to files that are on a server. There's certain things. There's also, it's very much like doing finds in unstored fields. We've had this type of logic to determine whether to do it on the client or the server for quite some time. Sorting is not the first thing that's using this logic. Doing find operations on unstored fields go through a similar complex decision process to determine whether to do it on the server versus on the client. And sometimes there's certain calculations that can't be done on the server, especially if it depends on local state information in the client. But as for giving more control to the user, probably the only control we could give if we wanted to add this option would be to force it onto the client all the time, basically put it back the way it was before. There's no way we would probably never give you an option to force it onto the server, just because there'd be many times that you couldn't do it on the server. Now, we are looking at how the sort on server is working, and we will tweak our algorithms, deciding when to do it on the client versus onto the server. I mean, toward the end of the ETS processing, we were noticing that we gave a lot more weight to if there was related records in it to push it to the server, even if there's other things that would say it probably wouldn't be better to do it on the server. So, because that made a much better performance improvements on the different solutions we were looking at. But we are watching what's happening, and we may tweak it some more.
Great, Clay, thank you so much. We are out of time. I want to thank all of you for giving us enough great questions to spend the entire hour responding to them. As I said, it is a luxury to have this much time. Typically, if we do a preview webinar, we're lucky to have 10 minutes. But we really enjoy doing this, so we want to thank you. We know your time is extremely valuable to you. We do appreciate your willing to spend an hour of your time to listen to us talk about our products. And with that, we're going to sign off and thank you and have a great day.